What's going on, guys? Evan the Dark Souls 2 enthusiast here, bringing the Dark Souls 2 gameplay commentary. This time we're going to be completing the No Man's Warf, bringing down the Flexile Sentry, and between the high points in the video we'll be going over some other community-related things, and some of the topics include I want to talk a little about stun locking in PvP in this game and how that differs from other games in the Soul series. I want to talk about how interacting with NPCs can be an absolute pain, and talk about what I call, the NPC requirements, which I loathe in all the Souls games. I'll even give a historical outlook on how that's worked on other iterations of the Soul games. I want to talk about the Ring of Thorns, some of the requirements associated with that, and yet another Dark Souls 2 gripe. And I talk about the Old Sun Ring, which is another PvP related item. So basically talking about the two hot topic PvP rings. We're going to talk about Spice and how that looks as relates to the game. I want to talk about the Covenant rewards again and sort of put my thing down there about that. And I think I just want to talk about some of the design choices in Dark Souls 2 that, as time has gone on, are proving to not work out as well as I hoped, and maybe not even as well as FromSoft hoped. So we'll see what happens. Also, you'll see in the timeline of the video, in the description, there is a video timeline as always. The highlights are 4 minutes and 30 seconds, where we'll see Lucatiel, who's an NPC in the game that has achievements related to her, so that's featured. About almost 21 minutes, we'll see the cinematic where I call the ship. 35 minutes, we'll see Gavlan, Gavlan deal, Gavlan wheel, something like that. 37 minutes, we'll see me summon Lucatiel for all the useless. And 40 minutes, we'll see the Flexile Sentry boss fight, and that should bring us about to the last 5 minutes of the video. So I'm kind of going to open with NPC requirements. Before I jump into that, I want to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say NPC requirements. And this is prevalent in lots of the Souls games, and basically all of them, really. And NPC requirements are essentially that you can't use a merchant's services to buy spells, upgrade certain equipment, etc., unless you meet a minimum stat requirement, which I've always found to just be an outrageous design choice. And it was obviously the worst in Demon Souls, and I'll talk about why. But so I'm not going to go through all this. I'll go through some of the specific NPCs I'm talking about. So Strades, he is the NPC that you can trade boss souls to make certain weapons and get certain spells and things like that. Very important merchant. He actually requires 3 intelligence and 3 faith. And while that's actually on the low side for most starting characters, like I think if you're a bandit, for example, you wouldn't actually start with the required statistics, the stats on your character to talk to him. And that's a big deal. I mean, Strades has a lot of in-game gear players are going to want, so having him level restricted just makes no sense. It's just a really lousy design choice in my opinion. Carhillion of the Fold, he is your int guy. He teaches you all the spells. You need 8 intelligence for him to talk to you. That's not as much of a deal as Strades, but I still don't see why that's a thing at all. And lastly, there's Falcon, and Falcon is the Hex fella, dark magic / hexes, and he requires 8 intelligence and 8 faith. So those are all the NPC trainers, if you will, that have stat requirements, and I detest all of them. But before we get into that, let me talk a little bit about the history of that. So all the Souls games, from Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, and Dark Souls 2, have had merchants where you have to have certain stats to get them to speak with you. Usually that's the spell sellers. In Dark Souls 1, for example, I don't remember the exact numbers, but in some instances the Sorcerer's Apprentice, Logan's Apprentice, and Logan, they won't actually teach you magic unless you have a certain amount of intelligence. Now I believe in the case of Logan, once he went crazy, spoiler alert, Logan goes crazy. Once Logan went crazy, he'd actually be willing to teach you spells regardless. So that's just the thing, but he wouldn't teach you in Firelink Shrine because you don't have the quote-unquote talent in your mind. So I have no idea what the design philosophy is. I don't know if that's like a roleplay thing or if it's to try to keep players from wasting souls. Like, you don't have the stats to use these anyway, so we're just going to lock out this menu. But I don't think that can be it, because you can't actually do business with Strades, and he has some stuff that's just weapons that any non-magic user can use. So I haven't the faintest why that was a design choice, but we're coming up on our first moment here in the video timeline. That's with Lucatiel. So I've said this in other videos. I'm just going to keep giving the spiel as we go. Basically, to complete her quest line, you need to talk to her in all her different locations, completely exhaust her dialogue, and summon her in 3 out of 4 boss fights. And Flexile Sentry coming up is one of the places you can summon her, and it's one of the easier bosses that you can summon her for, so I strongly suggest that you do summon her in this fight. Her other summon is in Black Gulch. There's one in against the Swelter Demon, and he's pretty challenging, so she usually gets killed in that one. And there's one other place you can summon her, and it's escaping me right now, but it's all available in the wiki, and there will be links to her in the wiki for this video. Links to the wiki in the description of this video, rather. But getting back to the whole NPC spell requirement thing, I think it really just serves to inconvenience players, because players have always just found ways around it. So in Dark Souls 1, you couldn't really get around it without wasting some stat points. And so if you're trying to go for a PvP build, those were wasted levels. So basically, everyone just created like a trophy character that could, buy all the spells and stuff like that. Because there's always a get all the miracles achievement, get all the sorceries achievement, get all the pyromancies achievement. And thus, as a result, players would just do a trophy hunter where they would make PvP builds that could easily transition into trophy hunters, where you wanted to have the int and the faith to get those miracles / sorceries, or players just did multiple run-throughs to make multiple characters eligible, or a lot of players just make their first character a non-PvP character, and that character just runs around and gets all the trophies before they remake another character for the PvP. All those are acceptable options. I just don't think there should be any reason that players have to meet these stat requirements for NPCs. I don't think it adds very little in terms of immersion and lore, in my opinion, and once again, it just forces players to do silly things. So in Dark Souls 2, the way I circumvented this on my characters was I would just get the required statistics to level a particular skill, or to rather purchase the skills I needed and things like that, and then I would immediately use a soul vessel to reskill your character. So in Dark Souls 2, not a huge deal. You just take one character to get all your trophies and reskill, but once again, just an inconvenience that contributes nothing to the game, and kind of getting tired of some of the design choices in Dark Souls 2 that seem to serve no purpose other than pose unnecessary restrictions on the player. And I'll get to those later, a little later in the video. We have plenty of time to talk about other things. But first, I want to sort of wrap up the history of this NPC requirement system, because there's a lot more there. So in Demon Souls, the original iteration of the Soul series, essentially, a lot of spells in Demon Souls, their effectiveness was not actually tied to the amount of intelligence you had. One such skill was warding. Warding was a skill you could attune, a magic that you could attune. It required, it had no requirements to actually cast. It was just if you could equip it, you could cast it. And you could use a catalyst that you didn't actually meet the requirements to use, like a wand. And more or less how that looked would be, so warding added a tremendous amount of physical defense, not tied to any attribute or stat. So you could basically use a broken as in you don't meet the requirements to use it, wand to cast it, and it's either on or off, and thus you had it on. So players would always want warding. Basically any player would want warding. Unfortunately, you had to have a certain amount of intelligence to get that, and in Demon Souls there was no character reskilling. So what players ultimately winded up doing was de-leveling, because in Demon Souls you could pretty efficiently de-level. There were certain NPCs that could de-level you and things like that, and it would always de-level. I can't remember the exact mechanics on what it de-leveled anymore. It's not really relevant to a Dark Souls 2 video, but rest assured it was a colossal inconvenience where you had to go find another player in the game or an NPC who could soul suck you, which was actually a skill. Because in Dark Souls 1, the soul suck was the Dark Hand, and it basically just stole humanity, whereas in Demon Souls, actually take a whole soul level from you. There were certain bosses that could do it, things like that. So, total pain to play and skill your character a certain way with the intention of de-leveling the character. Just really silly, and once again, didn't really contribute anything to the game, but did serve to annoy players and create quite the barrier for certain sort of minimized maxed PvP builds back when that was a thing. Min-maxing your PvP build arguably isn't even a thing anymore, but I'll talk about that once again a little later in the video. So, I don't understand that. It's basically like a barrier, at least in Dark Souls 2, to my knowledge. If you don't have the stats to use the magic anyway, there's no point in buying them. So basically, idiot proofs people wasting their souls on spells they can't cast, or it, just prevents people from getting trophies on the same character unless they level stupid things that they don't want. I haven't the faintest what the ideology was in putting in the game, but I don't think it's really, once again, I don't think it contributes anything, and putting any kind of requirement on Strayeds is just unreasonable. Putting requirements on a boss soul merchant, like, that's, I think that's downright unacceptable by FromSoft. I don't, once again, one of those design choices that I'm not real sure about, but anyway, we'll go ahead and move on. I've sort of belabored that point, but you know, I cannot emphasize enough how sick of that I am. I'm not delusional. I think that will be a recurring motif in this Soul series. Spell vendors and miracle vendors and things like that that have certain stat requirements in order to hold a conversation with them. And besides, that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, some of these people, like, I save their bacon. Like Strayeds, dude, that guy is petrified as a stone when I rescue him. I feel like that guy would want to, I mean, he might be cocky as hell, but I figure that guy would want to talk to me no matter what. I mean, at least send me some spells, brother. So, I don't know if that's a thing. Next up is I want to talk a little bit about stun locking in PvP and how that's sort of related to the Soul series and how that looks in Dark Souls 2 and my thoughts on that. So, for those of you who don't PvP a lot, you're probably still familiar from PvP. PvE rather. Stun locking is when you get hit and thus you can't do anything because you're staggered because you've been hit. And the way that worked in Demon Souls is typically larger weapons would stun you, and Demon Souls had no poise. Armor was just raw defense, and those armors added very, very little defense. So what that turned out in being is in Demon Souls, the armor you wore was essentially Fashion Souls. It didn't really matter what armor you wear because it contributes so little to defense in Dark Souls 1, or I'm sorry, forgive me, Demon Souls. So little in Demon Souls that you basically just wore whatever you thought looked cool and kept you underweight, and so everyone was running around either naked or in random cloth pieces, you know, Saint set, things like that, and defense essentially meant nothing. Very few of the armors actually had effects that were worthwhile, so ultimately, all for the looks in Demon Souls, and I kind of like that. I mean, I like character customization with armor and stuff like that, but I also kind of like the fact that you just wore what you thought looked cool, and that was the thing. There was nothing else to it. So the way stun locking worked in Demon Souls was essentially that there was no armor, there was no poise even in the game at that point. So most things that hit you that were of any substantial size would stun you or downright floor your character. And since katanas were the premier PvP weapon in Demon Souls, next to like Dragon Bone Smasher, as always there's a couple top tier weapons, but all the katanas were top tier weapons in Demon Souls, and so you'd run into a lot of stun lockers with katanas. And basically what would happen with that was if you were in stun lock, you were being hit and you couldn't take any actions, if you toggled from one hand to two hands, it would actually break a stun lock. I doubt it was an intended feature. I think it was just sort of something that would happen. So, if you're getting hit by a katana over and over and you're staggering and you can't move, if you time a weapon swap correctly, you'll actually break the stun lock. So that ended up being some interesting mind games / skill barriers in PvP where you had to sort of stop panicking and get used to the concept of once you started getting into hit stuns to being willing to toggle out of those kind of attacks. And that was something I enjoyed. I thought it did add an interesting skill barrier, and you'll see me circle strafing this dude trying to get a backstab, and it's just kind of embarrassing considering if I just hit him twice he'll die. Makes way more sense. I did, however, go style him there and guard break him and one-shot him, but as I was saying, the way that... So basically you could toggle out of stuns, which, there's mixed feelings on that. Is there any change in a game or any quote-unquote feature or design philosophy? There's always controversy, and some people argued that you should never, you should just take the damage until you run out of stamina. I don't know. I think most of the player base decided that breaking the stun lock through weapon swapping was actually more of a expression of skill, therefore, we liked it. As time goes on, most people start to consider things a matter of skill, and we like them. Exceptions being backstabs in Dark Souls 1, where I think everybody got a little burned out on them at the end, unless you were the guy doing all the backstabs. So, let's go forward to Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 1, the principal way to counter hit stun and things like that was essentially poise. Poise was introduced in Dark Souls 1, and it's essentially as it is today. It's a value on your armor where if the attack falls below a certain poise damage, basically it's a game of breakpoints like all the Dark Souls stuff. Their attack versus your poise. So, and there are these, fundamental breakpoints in PvP for Dark Souls where you wanted to have X amount of poise, that way you didn't get hit stun by little weapons. You don't want to get hit stun from one hit from a katana or one-handed katana swipe, things like that. Different people would go for different breakpoints in their build based on what their character layout could afford. Like, the heavier the weapon, the less poise you could really afford to have. Or you started warping your build around poise, which is essentially what happened in Dark Souls. Poise was an extremely powerful mechanic, in no way broken in my opinion, but an extremely powerful mechanic nevertheless. And thus, players would completely ignore most stats on armor and just look at the poise to weight ratio versus their total ratio. And as a result, you wind up with everyone essentially wearing the same armor, unless they're just trying to style or be cool, or their build required something very, very specific. So, basically what I'm saying is everyone was running on Giants or Havels with a Mother's Mask. That's basically what the game degenerated into, was people getting as much possible poise as they could on whatever weapon they chose, and then that's how they rocked the PvP. Nothing would hit stun them very often. I mean, once you get enough poise, they're very hard to hit stun. And that's just how it worked, and I think that system worked relatively well. I thought if there had been greater variance in armor, if you made defense a little better for PvP. I mean, honestly, the thing about Dark Souls I always found interesting is, rather Demon Souls, not so much Dark Souls, but in Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2, by New Game Plus Plus, even New Game Plus to a point, the armor you're wearing for PvE is just trivial, frankly, because most of the enemies you encounter, bosses at least, will two-shot you, three-shot you, one-shot you, just depending on their attack and how much vigor you got. But since the breakpoint on vigor is lower in this game, not necessarily lower, but it just doesn't seem to be as rewarding as in other Souls games. Gouging out your vigor just isn't worth it to a lot of players, and thus, what I'm ultimately saying is the armor doesn't really need to be balanced around PvE very much, because it does nothing in PvE in 2 out of the 3 games. So I think if they had done the armor balance specifically around PvP, that would have been cool, but I think very little design time is actually dedicated to PvP, which is why the Souls series are always such a mess. People love to PvP in them, myself included, but ultimately there's just a lot of problems. And we'll talk about those later in the video too, both historically and in our beloved Dark Souls 2, our most recent iteration in the series. But, and you'll see on the screen I'm struggling with these guys. I've always struggled with enemies that have a really long reach of attack. I never trust my ability to roll. And in Dark Souls 2, with the weird hitboxes, coupled with the whole adaptability discussion, the invincibility frames, and rolling in general just not feeling up to snuff, I have a hard time trusting myself to roll that stuff because I don't think it's going to work out, and frankly, typically it doesn't. I've become sort of a shield guy in Dark Souls 2. I shield a lot more than I roll in a lot of instances, and it's admittedly just not as an exciting way to play. It's a little more, way safer, way more slow-paced, but it is reliable, and I think to a point in all the Souls games, having a good command of using a shield, is ultimately much safer than rolling for many players. It takes a lot more trial and error to get good at rolling, and it doesn't take that much trial and error to get good at blocking. And even if you are good at rolling, shielding is still really reliable. So I think having big shields is the key to making Souls games easier, although obviously there are many other ways to make the Souls games easier. So moving forward with the poise discussion, you enter Dark Souls 2, where poise gets really weird because it's not like Demon Souls and it's not like Dark Souls. And this all relates back to the stun locking, which is where we originally started. So in Demon Souls, you escape stun lock by toggling out of it. In Dark Souls 1, you beat stun lock by essentially, getting enough poise that you could recognize what weapon they were using and knowing how many hits you could take before you got staggered. That was sort of a skill barrier in its own way, is being able to recognize all the different weapons, their different poise values, their poise damages, and obviously not the most challenging part of PvP, but it was certainly something that many players struggled with when they initially got the game. And I actually really like the Dark Souls 1 system of poise over Demon Souls, as poise doesn't do anything because there is no poise. Well, in Dark Souls 2, poise is just taken, in my opinion, sort of a turn for the worse. It is sort of a shadow of its former glory in that, in my experience, poise only prevents hit stun if you're actually swinging a weapon. At least that's what it looks like to me. Or you just need loads of it. I actually can't tell which. It might just be, frankly, downright near useless. But if I'm running around with 40 poise, which I have, which is probably a mix of medium and light armor, or maybe one piece of heavy. You know, there's various combinations to get different poise combinations, and we don't know the breakpoints yet, but, you know, 40 poise, I was still getting staggered by dagger hits, guys. Dagger hits. By the way, we're coming up on the moment in the video where I'm going to call the ship, which I think is a really neat cinematic, and this, probably of any Souls game, is one of my favorite ways to transition to an area. I mean, I'm used to gargoyles, you know, miraculously coming out of the sky and grabbing my character and dragging me to another world, and there's some lore behind the gargoyles doing that, but I don't know, it doesn't seem as cool as in this, where you actually go to a harbor, a secret harbor, under a tower, and thus you call a ship that takes you to a lost prison. You know, and then you look at the lore behind it, and essentially, you know, undead slash dissidents slash whoever Vendrick didn't want to have around, who is the king, would basically be shipped overseas in one of these boats and locked up in the Bastille. So I thought that was really cool to transition to an area, you know, to actually make a little background behind why you're taking a ship there, what the ship does, things like that. I thought that was really cool, and I'd like to see more transitional areas like that. The whole calling of this eerie ghost ship so that you can ride what would probably be a prison ship to a prison to slay a prisoner in the prison. That's just a really cool transition of events to me. That kind of hidden lore is deep to me, where, you know, I'm taking this, sailing out this damned harbor to a damned prison to kill a damned prisoner because they have, you know, a soul that I need. From a boss from the first game. Now that's great lore, at least in my opinion. Maybe not the greatest of depth, but for a Souls game where a lot of it's fill in the blanks and stuff like that, I think, you know, that's really awesome. So, you know, I'd like to see more transitions like that to areas in the future. And once again, it's going to be a while before we see another Souls game. That's kind of the only transition of its like in this game. But in general, I found the environments in Dark Souls 2 to be really pleasing. I found Dark Souls 1 to be pleasing as well, but a lot of the areas in Dark Souls 1, I, you know, have mixed feelings. Like the whole Blight Town, Witch of Izalith, Lost Izalith areas, they were interesting lore concepts, but they were just ugly and kind of unfun to be in. I mean, obviously Anor Londo was absolutely beautiful, and the Painted World was a fantastical kind of area, but other than those two places, nothing really struck me as interesting. Just a lot of darkness, difficult to navigate areas, and, you know, nothing that I sort of missed seeing or anything I'd like to go back and visit. Whereas, definitely the environments in Dark Souls, I found to be way more memorable. But we're off base here a little bit, so I want to wrap up this poise topic so I can move on. So in Dark Souls 2, I'm not even sure myself, but with some testing, it looks like if you have poise and you're swinging your weapon, the poise will keep your attack from being interrupted. So, you know, if I have a big great axe and I'm swinging it, if I don't have any poise, a dagger can just poke me and it'll break my attack. You know, disrupt it, and I'll just look all the silly. Whereas if I have enough armor, enough poise rather, on my armor, you know, it'll be a little different. I will be able to successfully finish my attack and damage my opponent. And trading one dagger poke for, you know, a great axe hit is a good trade for the guy with the great axe. So it's basically like hyper armor from a fighting game, if my analysis is correct. But even then, I think the old system for poise was a lot simpler to grasp, a lot more enjoyable for people to plan builds around. But I guess to a point it maybe led to cookie-cutter build designs with all the min-maxing on poise, but this game is really not going to be any different. I mean, if people bother with poise at all. I know a lot of people in PvP, myself included, we're just on the Fashion Souls plan where, you know, armor makes such a little difference in terms of damage. And I know someone will come in the comments and say, but it does make a difference. You know, I've got on heavy armor and I take 200 less damage. And that is no doubt true, but typically, like I said, by the later stages of the game, that reduction of 200 damage is just, it's just not significant. It just becomes Fashion Souls. Poise, in my opinion, is what made armor so important and valuable in Dark Souls 1. And I liked having that added element of character customization. Plus, you could still mix your Fashion Souls with your armor. So, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed Demon Souls, where, you know, you could basically wear what you want because it's not that impactful. In fact, it's not impactful at all, so you could just wear whatever you wanted for style. And then in Dark Souls 2, I just think we've got basically the gimped down nerfed version of poise, which I don't think most players are going to bother with. I haven't bothered with it much. I mean, time will tell. Maybe I'm vastly underestimating the usefulness, or maybe someone's had a lot of success using it. But And I've loaded up on a lot of poise, and I haven't really seen a lot of performance differences between lots of poise and very little poise. And this all kind of goes back into the stun locking, where you wind up basically playing, sometimes people compare Dark Souls PvP to sort of like a really dumbed down fighting game. And while I don't really like the analogy, I see where they're coming from, because in fighting games you kind of wind up playing like footsies. And footsies basically refers to attacking one another, trying to land a combo. That basically feels like currently what we see in Dark Souls 2 PvP, at least when I play with people that know what they're doing, is because we all know that typically most attacks aren't going to get... A lot of attacks aren't going to wind up getting disrupted. So it's a lot of rolling forward, rolling backwards, throwing your longest range attacks, trying to land pokes on your enemy. And eventually you try to time it so they're low on stamina, or you see an opening where you can go in and just stun lock them. So people said stun locking was too strong in Dark Souls 1, and then people discovered poise, and then all of a sudden stun locking was not a big deal. Whereas in Demon Souls, same thing. Everyone just said, you know, get a katana and stun lock them forever. And then people got good at toggle swapping, and that changed the meta where, you know, big heavy hitting weapons might necessarily be better, because who needs to stun lock when you can take off 2/3 the HP with one hit? In this game, it really does feel like it's been dumbed down to who can stun lock the other person better. Depending on your weapon choice, of course. I mean, spears aren't like that, but you can really take a dagger, enchant it with something, and just start poking away at somebody, and you'd be surprised how much damage it does so quickly. And I find that to be a little bit of a drag. I mean, not that I don't stun lock people, don't get me wrong, but I don't know, just to me it feels sort of half-baked compared to some other Souls games, and that's kind of a letdown. So that's poise from the Demon Souls to Dark Souls 1 to Dark Souls 2. It wasn't a thing, it was the most important thing, and now it seems like a largely irrelevant thing. That's my current read. Who knows how things will shape up. If anyone has any more data on poise, let me know. And at the 27-minute mark, we're coming up here on another timeline moment, which is, this is where we locate Carhillion of the Fold, who is necessary for achievements, by the way, and I don't have the requirements to talk to him. I will come back and see him later, once I'm ready to respec my character, just to talk to this guy. And once again, all the silliness. There's actually an achievement in this game to move, I think it's 9 NPCs to Majula, or move all the eligible NPCs to Majula, essentially. And he is one of those set NPCs who you have to move. And I find that to just be a total drag. I mean, I don't have to respec my character just to do an event. That's kind of how things shaped up. So the Gathering of Exiles trophy will require me to blow a soul vessel. So not the biggest deal in the world, but also kind of a letdown. On this boat is where the boss is, but it's a little more complicated than that, because like I said, this is one of the locations where you can summon Lucatiel for her achievement, her trophy. So I'm going to go ahead and summon her. And by the way, before anyone starts, and I've seen some comments from people who summon her, it's like, oh, you're using phantoms to make all the fights easy. Let me assure anyone watching these videos, Lucatiel, I'm probably saying her name wrong, but she is pretty awful. Her AI is bad. She's good at blocking until she stops blocking, and then she just takes all the damage. It's actually more of a challenge to keep her alive than it is to just fight the boss yourself. So that's kind of my read on a lot of the NPC summons. Unless you just intend to use them as a distraction, they're pretty much useless. Very few contribute significant damage to the boss, and keep in mind summoning phantoms will actually increase the life of the boss, so in most instances you're better summoning another player to do the work for you, or to just summon nothing. And I think that's the most quote-unquote pure and enjoyable way to play the Soul series is don't summon anybody, at least not on your first playthrough, just kind of do it yourself. And of course, I say that now, but when I'm trying to level up in the Sunlight Brothers Covenant, I'm all the Sun Warriors or what have you, I'm all the please summon me so I can get my Sunlight medals. So I guess there's no pleasing some people, and sometimes I might be one of those peoples. So let's move on to the Ring of Thorns. This thing is pretty controversy invoking in the PvP circle right now. Because first off, it adds a random luck to PvP, which no one likes. I mean, I don't. Most players who are trying to perform well don't like an element of luck. And basically how it works is every time you're hit, you have a chance to counterattack automatically with sort of a 360 fan of knives type thing. And Ring of Blades comes in a Ring of Blades 0, Ring of Blades +1, and Ring of Blades +2. Ring of Blades +1 you can purchase from a vendor late in the game. Ring of Blades 1, I don't actually remember the top of my head, but Ring of Blades 1 isn't really worth wearing because the return damage is so low. Well, this is not Ring of Blades, guys, so scratch all that. Ring of Thorns. Ring of Blades is a crappy ring that increases your physical attack damage and isn't worth wearing compared to the top tier rings. We're talking about Ring of Thorns. So Ring of Thorns 0, Ring of Thorns 1, Ring of Thorns 2, and to get Ring of Thorns 2, you have to win, according to the strategy guide. I haven't seen anybody actually have this item that's not a Mega Mueller. No one's been able to confirm this for me. For that breakable wall there is well hidden, in my opinion. 1,000 successful invasions. Now, what kind of invasions those need to be, I don't know. I don't know if that's Red Phantom invasions, Blue Sentinel invasions, Red Phantom invasions. Who knows what kind of invasions they need to be? Maybe, hopefully, all of the above. But 1,000 invasions, that is going to take forever. That is so miserable. But by the time you have it, you probably won't want to PvP ever again. So, most players are just going to wind up using the Ring of Thorns +1, and it's already really powerful at +1, which is kind of my point. So I think that anyone who farms a Ring of Thorns +2 will have a huge advantage in PvP. And I'd like to reiterate, because PvP, in my opinion, right now, is kind of who stunlocks who and does more damage while stunlocked, these rings make a huge difference. I mean, when you've got somebody stunlocked and their ring starts proc and you start taking all the return damage and they're just mashing their R1, there is some chance that while you're hitting them, they'll finally break out of your stun, start hitting you back, and if you've taken enough damage from the ring, you just might die in the strike back, or your Ring of Thorns might kill them. So you get these random sprays of Ring of Thorns that do random, unpredictable amounts of damage, and that just changes the whole dynamic of PvP, where fast striking weapons run this huge gamble of proccing these Ring of Thorns. Even if you're using a big weapon, you run the gamble of proccing on the first hit. It's just a much lower chance. And I don't know, I just think that kind of a ring is kind of silly in PvP. It makes you want a Vitality Gouge. There's nothing wrong with that. But you want to put these like Vitality Gouged high HP builds that are just trying to Ring of Thorns you to death. So I am completely against the Ring of Thorns. I would like to see it disabled in PvP. But on the flip side, some community members I talked to have been pointing out that currently in the game's iteration, it is probably the best, or at least the top 3 best counters to just stun locking through R1 spamming. So it makes an interesting counter, but that seems to put a lot of favoritism on the heavy hitting weapons over the fast striking weapons, and it gives even more of an advantage to magic, where the counterattack does nothing to most magic spells. So I don't know, the Ring of Thorns just seems poorly iterated for PvP. For PvE, I have no objections to it. I think it's fine. Not that it contributes a great deal to PvE. It's useful for PvE, don't get me wrong. You'll splash damage on people that attack you and mob you, and that's pretty cool, but it's definitely not going to replace the other top-tier PvE rings, in my opinion. So, Ring of Thorns, not a huge fan. I think it's another one of those, as I said earlier in the introduction, some of these design choices just strike me as really peculiar. So you're going to put a ring in that has a random chance of counterattacking random opponents that are hitting you that can actually proc a critical hit. So I don't know. I mean, having a ring that can inexplicitly and unavoidably deal 1,000 damage to you while you're meleeing, when you're hitting someone with your melee attacks, that's stupid, and it just kind of breaks PvP. It's like, even if they don't care about the PvP community, somebody can equip that ring, run around and get invaded and have, defense and just taking hits and getting lucky. So maybe I overestimate the value of the ring, but having played against people wearing it and having worn it myself, my choice would be it's broken in half, and it's amazing, and it's a huge determining factor, especially in dex-on-dex weapons. At least in my experience, which is limited at this point, but I'm top rank in the Bell Covenant, so that's 100 invasions. So I'm top rank in the Bell Covenant on 2 different characters. That's a minimum 200 successful invasions. I've probably been invaded 100 times between the 2 characters, 300 matches, So I probably have, 300 to 400 PvP matches at this point, and that doesn't even put me halfway to the Ring of Thorns +2. So I've already determined from my experience that ring is extremely powerful and makes a huge impact in the world of PvP, and yet, getting 1,000 invasions will take forever. And once you get it, could potentially just outright break it. I mean, I think the +2 version procs like some really a very high percent chance of a proc when you're hit, and that makes a big difference. For reference, according to the strategy guide, which isn't always accurate, but you've got 30% chance of a counterattack on Ring of Thorns +1, and that might honestly be balanced and maybe not even worth wearing. You know, if Ring of Thorns +2 is a +1 is a 50% chance, and that is definitely worth wearing. And Ring of Thorns +3 is a 70% chance. And at that point, that just sounds broken in half to me, you know, especially for fast swinging weapons on fast swinging weapons. So I suppose the answer would be when you start hitting somebody, don't just go ham on them. But when you're builds that are dual wielding, you know, going ham on your enemy, that's all the plan, man. So I don't know. I'm just completely against proc-based rings in PvP, and more importantly, I'm against the entire concept of the ring. So I'm not crazy about Ring of Thorns. Please, if you have insights, let me know in the comments if you agree, you disagree. This is the kind of thing where knowing how other people feel about it might have a good opportunity of informing my next video or me doing some personal testing, because I'm pretty heated on the subject of this whole Ring of Thorns thing. Okay, so yet another ring is next under discussion. That is the Old Sun Ring. And this is sort of similar to the Ring of Thorns in that, you know, you start getting hit by stuff, you have, you know, it only comes in one form. The Old Sun Ring is easy to acquire. It only comes in one form, and basically, when you are hit, you have a chance of basically laying a fireball at yourself and it blows up. It's very similar to the Pyromancy, which is similar, which is Lingering Flame. You basically have a chance of triggering a Lingering Flame on yourself depending on how much damage you're taking. The more damage you're taking at a time, the more likely it is to trigger. So that can be pretty cool because it's like an anti-gank ring. Because the more people that pile up on you, the more attacks you're taking in rapid succession, the more quickly the ring seems to trigger, at least in my experience. So the more damage I take at a time, the more likely the ring sort of triggers. So as a result, if like 3 phantoms jump on you and start swinging, if you can just survive a little bit, that ring might start exploding, and you can wind up swinging the matches that way. Okay, so here's a timeline moment. We're going to become human here at the 37-minute mark so we can summon our Phantom to complete her trophy, and furthermore to quote-unquote help us with the boss, and that actually means make the boss more difficult. If you are going to summon her to try to do the trophy, which I recommend, can't stress this enough. Please, please, please kill all the enemies in No Man's Warf before you try to bring her with you, because enemies have a high probability of knocking her into the water. She'll put her shield up and get forced back into the water. And that's just an instant kill for her, and it's really annoying. It's better just to kill all the enemies and then bring her with you. Plus, she'll take damage before the boss fight. And you want to have all these NPCs at max HP before the boss fights because they're really not strong enough to fight the bosses. So that's how the old Sun Ring works. And we're coming towards the end of the video, and the Flexile Sentry fight, I'm not going to talk through it, so you only have a couple minutes left. So I want to hit our last topic because I don't want to pick it up next time. But Old Sun Ring, it's like a AoE version of the Ring of Thorns, and more balanced and more fair. I'm all about the Old Sun Ring. I think it's a pretty cool innovation. Yeah, it's still random luck based, but at least that luck to a point is controllable, whereas Ring of Thorns, not nearly as much. Also, Old Sun Ring doesn't, in my experience, has not had a crit, whereas I have seen Ring of Thorns crit for like 1,000 damage. I don't know if that was something specific going on there. I don't actually understand the mechanics of some of these rings yet. But I do know inexplicitly doing 1,000 damage to an invader is pretty funny, unless you're the invader. So, last but not least, I don't really think I need to say a lot about this towards the end of the video, but I do want to throw this out there. The Brotherhood of Blood's Covenant requirements are absolutely ridiculous. To +2 that Covenant, you need 500 wins, either in the arena or through invasions. 500. And apparently, according to the wiki, every time you lose, you actually go down a rank. So, you know, for existence, for example, you know, if you have 500 wins and 300 losses, you only have 200 overall. So, you know, considering it has taken me at times like 15 minutes to find a single invasion, you know, do the math on that. It could take forever to max out that Covenant. Or if you're using the arena, you're probably fighting against people that know how to PvP, so it's going to be even harder to build it up, and it is actually quicker to just go to New Game Plus Plus and buy the Covenant reward from Chancellor Wagler. Is it Wagler? Whalger? I don't know. From the Chancellor in Drangleic Castle. It's more practical to do that than it is to max out that Covenant. And those Covenant requirements they need lowered. And I don't even think that's a matter of opinion. I think it is a matter of fact. Covenant requirements for the Blue Sentinels and the Brotherhood of Blood needs lowered. The same thing the Bell Covenant is, in my opinion. 100 wins, max it. Even that will probably take most players hours to grind out a small piece of gear. I cannot stress enough how ignorant I think the Covenant requirements are. So, here comes the boss fight. I'm going to go silent and sort of rest my voice here for a little bit. I hope you guys enjoy. Alrighty guys, that's Flexile Sentry. He's actually really easy. He becomes a recurring respawning enemy later, so he's more of just a trial enemy, like a Capra Demon of this game, only not quite as difficult. So now we're going to get to ride the ship. This is maybe my favorite moment in the entire game, is when you ride the ship. So awesome. So we're wrapping up here. We are almost at the very end of the video, a couple minutes left, so I'm going to wrap up this Covenant thing. And just talk about these confusing design choices. So, this is all preliminary, but preliminary reports reflect the fact that New Game Plus does not solve the soul memory problem. In New Game Plus, soul memory still determines matchmaking, and sort of the matchmaking window is not as broad as we had hoped. So in other words, if you play your character long enough, you're only going to be able to verse other people that are like soul level 400 plus, because you're going to be accumulating all these souls, and since it's not based on your soul level, it's based on accumulated souls, you have no choice but to level up. So eventually all characters are going to progress into the Super Saiyan, do all the things, have all the builds. And to me, that is the epitome of game ruining. I mean, that might force me to go running right back to Dark Souls 1 or right out of the Souls series until the next iteration. I really hope so. That sounds overly dramatic, but really, this is a huge problem for the PvP community. I can't stress enough, as a frequent PvPer, how damning the soul memory system seems to PvP. I don't want the developer to force me to take all my characters high level. I don't want the developer to determine who I can PvP with. I almost favor like a no restriction. I like the soul level restriction because at least it doesn't balance for gear, but at least it controls for level. Why can't soul memory only look at the souls you spent to level your character and the souls invested in your gear? That might help keep things relevant, keep things even. I don't know. I think there is a whole lot of solutions to this problem, and the current soul memory iteration just seems like I thought there might be something under that elevator I've never checked before, but clearly that's death because Dark Souls characters can't swim. But I can't reiterate enough how bad the soul memory system looks right now. I really hope new information is going to come out that kind of makes us all look like tinfoil hat guys who are just overreacting to a problem. But the way it looks right now, the way I understand it, it's going to kill the longevity of this game for me. It's going to force me to reroll characters so much. And since I'm not a Mega Mule type user or bottomless box glitch user and things like that from their Souls games, it would take me so long. So if I get a character I really like, I'm going to play them for so long before I have to make another tune. Like, I'm sorry, that's just unacceptable. And since the matchmaking is so strict and difficult now with the new system, like, are you kidding me? You want me to successfully invade 500 people? Invading and killing 500 people or more, God forbid you're going for the Ring of Thorns +2, or, really, God forbid you're trying to max out the, the Brotherhood of Blood. And I'm sure players have already. I'm just saying that that's a lot of time invested into a character. And if you're telling me every PvP match I win takes me closer and closer to not being able to use that character, I'm sorry, that is not a worthy investment of my time or anyone else's. I mean, the fact that there are still players endorsing the soul memory system and players endorsing these systems, I have to confess, I find that shocking. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean that in a purely, I'm just bewildered about what part of that is good that I'm missing. I mean, I had a friend suggest that maybe it was like kind of a built-in MMR system. That would have to be the most inefficient, jacked up MMR system I've ever heard of. So I don't know. Maybe what I've heard is wrong. Maybe it's not as powerful of a game controlling mechanic as I've heard. But man, the way things look right now, the soul memory system basically makes making PvP builds / PvPing such a fleeting pleasure that I don't know, I just can't justify it. It's so hard to even find PvP matches these days, particularly in New Game. In New Game Plus, I've heard it's a much more populated region, but even on New Game Plus, overall, I just don't think the experience is going to be worth it. So please let me know what you've heard about soul memory in the comments. Correct me if you think I'm wrong. I really don't think I am. I've looked into this a lot, but we'll see what happens. I actually emailed Namco Bandai just to get their thoughts on the matter. I'm sure they'll give me a stock response if they respond at all, and that's fine. But I'm trying to bring information to the YouTube channel. I'm trying to raise my own knowledge, so contacting developers, they're really the only people that have the information until the PC data dump. So we'll know more about how everything looks once the PC version comes out. People can data dump it and unlock all the secrets of the game all at once. But we are finally at the end of the video. I'm sorry there's a little bit more negativity in this video than I like to throw out there, but you know, I see serious problems with this game. I still love it. I'm still going to play it, but there are serious problems with this game, and I think, you know, talking about them and having conversations about development choices is all part of having a community on YouTube and having a community surrounding a game. So, once again, I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see everyone next time.